All right, I'm here with Prester John's Revenge. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing really good. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I uh, I checked you out. I guess you found me through the Alex Kashuta podcast, and you are also a writer on Substack. And in my effort to be a free flowing, free spirit. But I guess I'll
Hmm.
give you a little bit of background. I've done extensive road tripping. I don't do that anymore, but I've done extensive road tripping, and the intention of that was to meet as many people as possible around the United States without any kind of discernment or discrimination. Um,
Those are fun trips.
yeah, so I think I'm kind of taking that digital. I'm less interested in building like real world community, and I'm more interested in just like hit and run. Let's let's try to see who's out there. I just actually I'll say this in introduction is that I recently listened to a podcast by Catherine D on Default Blog on Substack. She did a very well produced um, like video, audio recording, or doc. I would even call it a documentary on Art Bell and his radio show Coast to Coast. A little bit before my time, I wasn't aware of it when it was going on, but that idea, there's like a slogan like "Caller, are you there?" Like kind of shouting
Yeah.
out into the radio waves and just saying like, "Hey, does anyone want to respond to me? Does anyone have anything to say?" And you do have some things to say. I mean, you have some interesting articles here. One of the topics that I think we have both looked into. Um, you reference Martyr Made, which I know him as Daryl Cooper. Um, what is your kind of assessment? Do you think Cooper is getting at something important? Do you to support his, kind of a deconstructing the civic religion, or are you more critical?
Yeah. So a couple things. Again, I would say I think that's something we connected on a little bit in the chat. I'm also a admirer of Catherine D. But yeah, I actually recently did my first podcast, which was with Alexandra Constantine and Fisto Sobani, and we actually discussed this. Um, and full disclaimer, I haven't actually listened to that Daryl Cooper interview. So take it with a grain of salt when I say that. But I definitely am on the deconstruction side a little bit. But with something like, especially with World War II, and as sometimes it's called, the new civic religion, the post World War II consensus. It's something that I'm interested in, and but I also understand, why people are very averse to it. Obviously, for the first reason being, it can be a little bit um, kind of a slippery slope to go down when you're talking about stuff like that, especially with World War II historical revisionism, because you don't want somebody to misinterpret you that you're like, a Nazi sympathizer. That having been said, I think something that Daryl Cooper brought up and that we discussed as well is that some like a figure like Churchill specifically, um, there's been a lot of revisionism about Churchill from the left, and when you start to see a little bit more from the right, I think you start to see kind of like an autoimmune response, honestly, um, just because the World War II myth is just so fundamental to like the founding of the post-war consensus and American imperialism, and that's kind of what we discussed on that last podcast as well. Like once you start pulling at those strings, especially people who are like secular saints like Churchill, then it can get a little bit problematic, and you start to see that autoimmune response with the regime, the system, whatever you want to call it. So it's definitely something worth talking about, and I think Churchill is a really fascinating figure. As soon as you get off the reservation of like whatever the quote unquote accepted narrative is.
Yeah, I think the person who's another person who's articulated uh, this term right wing postmodernism. I think Roland's Rat on Twitter. I think uh, Parvini. I'm not sure what his real name is, but um, he believes that the right wing should be engaged in deconstruction of civil religion and kind of utilize Foucault or Allen Ginsberg 12 Rules for Radicals, flip that on its head, and I'm skeptical of that. I'm skeptical of that because I generally think that that is a cargo cult of the left, and I don't think that's actually how leftism functions at a deeper level. I think exoterically, superficially, it's true that the left is deconstructive, it's chaotic, it's BLM, it's the French Revolution, it's riots, it's burning things down, it's Dionysian orgies and Earth Mother
Right.
cults, partying, Molly, all this drug use, hippies. But
Hmm.
that is the superficial view of the left that I think most people understand it as. And then right wingers don't want to do any of that in particular, but they do think like, okay, well, we have a civic religion. There are some problems with it. Maybe it's not accurate. Maybe kind of the same way we had like a Copernican revolution. We had a geocentric model, and we need to update to a heliocentric model. And the civic religion is preventing us from doing that. And so we need to clear the field. We need a tabula rasa, blank slate. And once we sweep the old order away, then we're going to be free to build a new order. The problem I have with that is I don't think that's actually how historical revolutions work. I think that there's no such thing as chaos or negativity in itself. It's not an entity. It doesn't exist metaphysically. It doesn't exist politically. Chaos, violence, sexual orgies, all of these things
Hmm.
are basically transitional periods or transitional processes in between one form of order and another form of order. So rather than looking at the French Revolution and saying, well, first the revolutionaries just said, let's just start killing people randomly, and then eventually you get Napoleon, I think it's much more of a model of you had Freemasons with definite, clear, positive ideas of what they wanted. They were not like an ambiguous dissident right or dissident left or dissident anything. They weren't just against the monarchy. They had Platonic metaphysics. They had religious concepts. They met. They were friends with each other. They had secret meetings. They had physical places that they went to. So they had a hierarchy. They had a structure. They had a chain of command. They had orders. They had rituals that they did. So this was an organized, positive group of people with a common identity, ideological, religious identity, and they were necessary to create that transition. And when it happened, and like for years, nobody knew who these people were because they were secret societies. When the French Revolution breaks out, that's people's impression. People are only seeing the surface of the iceberg. That's why my logo is this icy mountain, because I think most people are only looking at the tip of the iceberg as, oh, the left is this negative, chaotic, deconstructionist, postmodern thing, and people on the right don't like a lot of that, but they say, well, we're going to have to defeat the left with its own methods, and they believe that those methods are deconstructive, and therefore they're engaged in deconstruction. But my rebuttal to that is that actually the left is not deconstructive, it's constructive, and the chaos that you see is a transitional period between different forms of order. And if you really want to change society, you should view chaos and deconstructing as a consequence of two constructive forces battling it out until one of them wins. Like in German, it's the Gotterdämmerung. I think there's the term for the Greek is the I don't know if it's Gotteskampf or the Clash of the Titans. Essentially, is the term in Greek. I don't know. I'm forgetting my Greek today. But essentially, this is my thesis: is that without a strong positive core, it can be esoteric, it can be a secret society. But if you don't have that, you don't have a chance. You can deconstruct, you can scrutinize, you can criticize, you can be like Daryl Cooper and say, oh, actually Churchill was a bad guy, in whatever way you want to do that. And maybe there's some factual accuracies. I'm sure like his India policy was pretty brutal, and his, keep Britain white policy after the war. He's considered racist. So yeah, there's all sorts of ways we can scrutinize and reveal the inner contradictions within liberalism. We can also do that for any religious system. We can do that for Christianity. We can do that for Islam. We can point out all these little contradictions and paradoxes. And as somebody who was an atheist for a number of years and loved Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and beating up on Christians, we'd love to go to the Bible and be like, see how these two verses contradict each other, and think that some great new secular world would come out of that. Of course, that's not what happened, and Richard Dawkins has kind of been depressed because he thought, oh, we'll get rid of religion and then everyone will just be enlightened and free thinking. But actually, now we got rid of religion and people are more dogmatic and have more superstitious beliefs than ever before. So yeah, just deconstructing, I'm very skeptical that can have any positive effects, and it's not attractive to me. And to me, the reason why people engage in that rather than doing the hard work of constructing a positive identity is because it's hard work and people don't like hard work. It's easier to nitpick and do what Daryl Cooper does than to be like, okay, well, I'm a Christian, but I'm this new kind of Christian. And, like Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith is a positive figure, I would say, in this dialectic, in that he really did come up with a new tradition, a new religion, a new form of Christianity, and he got people actually from all over the world, not just America, to go out to. Eventually, they landed in Utah, and that's pretty powerful. That's pretty amazing. And if a right-wing person wants to say, okay, well, we're going to do the new Joseph Smith strategy. We're going to be the new Mormons, and here's our religion. And maybe it's not for public consumption. Maybe it's a secret esoteric thing, which is fine. Maybe you have that. I guess that when I talk to people about that, a lot of them say, well, I do kind of have my own thing going on. So that would be the kind of question I say to you. When you feel that we should deconstruct the civic religion, do you think, Prester John, I assume that's a Christian reference. Do you believe that we need to return to Christianity? We need a new form of Christianity? What's kind of your positive alternative?
Yeah, so a couple things on that. I guess I'd kind of like to. I guess I can first address the Prester John thing. Honestly, so funny enough, it was something I just kind of like picked on a whim. And do you know like the history or the legend
I'm
of Prester John?
uneducated.
So
I'm uneducated.
the TLDR is like it was in the 12th century. In the medieval Europe, there is like this legend that came across about Prester John, who is the Christian king in Africa. And there's a lot of great history about that. I was trying to find, there was a great article that was written that was on Substack, actually, that kind of goes over it. But Prester John obviously never existed. At some point, they thought it was in Ethiopia, but it was kind of this wish fulfillment thing, really, for Christian Europe at the time. And I originally chose Prester John's Revenge because I came more from the left. At this point, I would call myself heterodox, politically homeless, whatever you want to call it. But my favorite, like little, and this may be apocryphal, but little historical counterfactual is that it was like a mistranslation of Genghis Khan, because at the time Genghis Khan was just wrecking the Muslim world. So they thought, oh, if somebody is, destroying the Muslim world, well, it must be Christendom. There's another Christian king out there. So that's kind of the original impetus of that. But to kind of give a little bit more context of your original question, I think they're definitely, and that's kind of part of what originally I became dissatisfied with aspects of the left, because I understand what you're saying. There's a lot of the left that has, a positive vision. I think both the left and the right will have a positive vision, but where to maybe tie that all together, I think kind of the value of the deconstruction of that post-war narrative, Churchill, what have you, is that I would say really since the fall of the Soviet Union, the left or the right don't really exist in any real historical terms. I forget if it was one of your articles or when you were talking to Alex Kashuda, you mentioned, and I thought this was really good framing of, the left pre-Marx, the left during the existence of the Soviet Union, and the left post-fall of the Soviet Union. So all that to say, I think finding some sort of new, civic religion. I'm personally not a Christian myself. I grew up Christian, but for a long time that was kind of a universal thing in Europe and the United States, kind of an agreed upon morality and framing device. And in the post World War II consensus, the myth of World War One, which is um, the United States, saved the world and made the world safe for democracy. That's kind of what replaced it for a lot of people, and even people I talk to on the left kind of still buy into that to a certain degree. And for a really long time, I would say probably up until like the neoliberal turn in the 80s and 90s, the left kind of saw themselves in opposition to that. And you saw them doing a lot more of the deconstruction. But since the neoliberal turn, and specifically in the American context, I would say probably around the Obama administration is when kind of the power dynamic shifted, and where you could say a lot of the institutional power started to went more to the Democrat side. But in either case, I would think like the left or the right in like the historical context don't really exist anymore. So to your point about, you know, um, needing a positive future vision of the future and seeing like revolution being a historical transitionary phase. I think we're kind of at a transitionary phase, and people are just throwing a lot at the wall to see what sticks. And take apart Churchill or the American founding, whatever myth you want to look at. I think this is kind of a part of that, like the Hegelian dialectic, if you will, to try to find what the new civic religion is. Because I think, like in a spiritual sense, Christianity, Judaism, or Islam still exist in the United States, but it doesn't have that same place that it used to. So I think people are, on the left, the right, people who are just kind of, I think, Richard Hanania referred to as like the Dale Gribble voter, who is just kind of just randomly grabs different bits of history or pop culture to try to find narrative from. I think that's where a lot of people are.
Yeah, I guess I guess I probably am similar to you in the sense that um, if I had a positive vision for the world, I would be leading the soldiers to the holy soldiers to Utah right now or something.
Mhm.
I think that is ultimately the solution, or is that is the thing people should be working toward. But I'm not. There's no hidden deep left plan where
Mhm.
secretly we're all coalescing in the compound and we're doing secret rituals somewhere. So I obviously don't. I don't have the ability to it's not fair for me to go to other people and say, well, you should have that sort of thing figured out because I don't have that figured out. I'm just basically of the opinion that uh, further deconstruction um, is not necessary. I see it as a form of accelerationism. Um, and I'm in favor of like technological advances, and maybe you could call that. So accelerationism means different things to different people. But in general, I'm very skeptical of the idea that somehow, like, I believe that if there's a million Daryl Coopers, if there's like a lot of really smart people, and maybe some of my fans will say it's not, you shouldn't call Daryl Cooper very smart, but I think he's probably got an IQ of 120 or something. I mean, he's reasonably intelligent. If you had a lot of smart people who are with Tucker Carlson, they form alternative media, Alex Jones, and really continue to push that. I think to what Richard has said about the Dale Gribble voter, I think you absolutely can achieve things like January 6th. I think it's entirely possible to push things like QAnon and get people out in the streets and get people dropping out of college and get people, and I don't think engaging in violence is the only way or the only kind of harm that can come out of that. That's also another potential effect. So I'm skeptical of the idea that promoting the breakdown of things like the American civil religion, or saying we should abolish the FBI, or those sorts of sniping from the sidelines and generally making the conditions in the country worse. Whether it's and I'm not just talking about economics, like maybe the GDP per capita stays where it is, but like lowering institutional trust lowers social trust. I'll give you an example. I was out in public during back in the days of COVID, and it was after January 6th, and someone came up to me sort of randomly. Like I didn't initiate contact, and he was like, "Hey, how you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, it's a nice day outside." And very quickly he went into like it took like three sentences for him to be like, "Oh, you're not one of those terrorists, right?" And he was referring to like Republicans because, the chain of causality between the Republican Party and January 6th and terrorism. And so I was like, wow, this is not good. It's not good when you meet random people in the street who are proactively interrogating you if you're a terrorist or not. It's not really
Mm-hmm.
the kind of society that we want to live in. I think it produces a lot of stress. I think it exacerbates mental illness. I think it causes families to break up. I think COVID did that. Whether you were getting the vaccine or not getting the vaccine, people no longer have contact with people in their families. I think Richard actually, I might have mentioned that to him, and he said, or maybe it's somebody else, but said like, sometimes people just need an excuse, and so ideology serves an excuse to break up a family because it was already weak, and there's some truth to that. But I still think that, promoting general social breakdown, social distrust in institutions, I see that as an accelerationist strategy of like the worse things get, the more likely we are to come up with a good thing to replace the bad thing. Yeah, I'm not entirely convinced that that's necessarily the case. I mean, I look at societies that are in really bad positions like South Africa, and I don't think South Africa is closer to some kind of national revolution and revival today than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. I think as things have gotten worse in South Africa, the prospects for like a turnaround in a different direction have only decreased. Now, is it fair to compare social breakdown or political breakdown to economic breakdown? Maybe they're not equivalent, and I'm making a false equivalence. But yeah, that's my
Sure.
general response.
Sure. And no, and that makes sense. And I guess the thing I would push back on a little bit is I think it's more. I don't think these things are causal. Say, trying to break down the civic religion, so to speak, or January 6th. I think they're kind of um, the social destabilization and kind of the fraying at the narrative is something that already exists, and these are things that are consequences. Um, and I think these are, we've been kind of seeing um, a lot of different aspects of the American myth or like the post-war liberal myth breaking down, be it seeing the failure in Iraq and Afghanistan, um, to and then once you start pulling at those threads, then it starts to kind of become ideologically incoherent a lot of the times. And this is something that I've thought about. I'm starting to work on a piece for again, look at the Dale Gribble voter, or I would say up until probably around the Obama era, I guess conspiracy had been kind of left coded, just as a way to try to make sense of a world that doesn't make sense. I kind of think of conspiracy almost like a folk religion, and you're just kind of taking these disparate events or like cultural cues and trying to find a kind of create some narrative around it. So I guess, I mean, I'm not somebody who, I think there's value to deconstruction, and I don't want to harp too much on the Daryl Cooper thing or Winston Churchill. Only because I haven't seen that podcast in question, so I don't want to say yep I endorse it, yep I don't endorse it. But again, these are conversations that have been had on the left as well that I've seen historically. You kind of alluded to how Churchill handled the colonial holdings in India, or how World War II could have gone differently, that could have prevented casualties. But no, I think this is just again something that a lot of that we're already seeing societal breakdown, and economic woes that have been kind of in the pipe for a long time. And again, this is all kind of downstream from that post-war neoliberal order of really American empire, and I think people are just trying to make sense of that. And I guess that would be my comment on that.
Yeah, I keep talking to libertarians and having this.
They still exist.
Yeah, I keep talking to them. I mean, Richard's a libertarian. I think that, see, if you go to Silicon Valley and you talk to billionaires, I mean, they're libertarians. So, yeah, I mean, it is certainly from the bottom up. There's no libertarian presence in our political process and in these debates, but in terms of intellectuals and people who are open-minded, free-thinking, willing to go outside the box. I mean, I think you bump into a lot of those people. I used to be a libertarian, but I encounter this argument from libertarians that American imperialism is bad and it's a betrayal of the original founding fathers, and we need to go back to this small little cozy Hobbit Shire thing. That's where prosperity comes from. Empire bad. Neoliberalism is imperialism in sheep's clothing, and I don't buy it. I'm not convinced that that's true. I think that the physical infrastructure of our Navy serves the same purpose as the British Empire in facilitating global trade. I don't think you can have global trade without global police. When people complain, America shouldn't be the world's policeman, as if somehow that's, mind your own business. Like there's this kind of nagging. In as much as I admit that K through 12 school teachers are the average person's experience of a nag. Like, do your homework, and no, you didn't do your homework right. So maybe nagging is liberal coded, but I feel like that idea of hey, mind your own business. You have no, I heard this comment recently of this term neo-Monroe doctrine coming from, an ostensible far-right person saying America's neo-Monroe doctrine it's an evil conspiracy by the globalists. And I'm like, what is the discernible difference between you're adding neo to scare quotes to make it seem like this is something bad. We've had the Monroe doctrine for quite some time, and I don't think the Monroe doctrine is the source of all of America's problems and why we're declining. I think the reason why we're declining or seeing a lot of social decay and problems is because we're transitioning from one religion to another. And I don't think that has to do with, imperial expansion as is the reason why Christianity is collapsing. I think if we got out of NATO and abolished the FBI and returned sovereignty to all 50 states, I don't think that would bring Christianity back. And so I would blame the fall of Christianity for a lot of the confusion and social problems that people are having. And I don't think that receding from the world and giving up and criticizing neoliberalism, which, I don't know what that even means. I know what capitalism means. I know what imperialism means. But again, I think this term neo, it's anytime you say neo, it's worse. It's neo. He's not just a Nazi. He's a neo-Nazi, not just liberal. It's a neoliberal. It's not just the Monroe Doctrine. It's the neo-Monroe Doctrine. So, yeah, I don't know what I know what liberalism is. I know what capitalism is. I know what imperialism is. I don't think most people, I'm happy, whatever, it's a semantic game. I'll be a neoliberal if people want me to be, or I'll be a neoconservative if people want me to call it. It's not how I self-identify, but those sort of words, they sort of trigger me because I hear them and I think there's not actually a causal relationship between Iraq, Afghanistan, and transgender people. But there seems to be this implicit suggestion that our, foreign wars and adventures are causing social decay at home. I think it has a lot more to do with the collapse of Christianity, and I think that's a very long history. I don't think that started after World War II. I think that started in the 19th century, and we could even go back. But certainly there were open atheists criticizing Christianity in the 19th century, and I think they're responsible for what's happening, now in the 20th century and the early 21st century. So yeah, that's how I would display. I would explain social decay. I think there's James Lindsay kind of goes off the rails with talking about Gnosticism and things like that. I disagree with him there, but I maybe would agree that it's valuable if we want to understand why social norms are changing or, as you say, decaying. We should like figure out, okay, well, what used to keep the social norms in place? Oh, it's Christianity. Okay, well, who started Christianity when they do that? And I think that has very little. If anything, I would say that World War II was a consequence rather than a cause of quote unquote social decay, quote unquote liberalism, quote atheism, whatever. Um, I think that you could reverse the causality there, if anything. But yeah, I would say that's the relation between those two. Um, do you would you like to fully explore this topic, or do you feel like we're hammering we're hammering it
I
too
mean,
hard?
I think because this is kind of, I think we can maybe move on, but I guess just to acknowledge a couple different things. I mean, I guess kind of what the problem becomes with, you can get a little bit too semantic with these things. Like for example, neoliberal. Like when I say neoliberal, I refer to like the specific like free market based, the market based economies like the Reagan, Thatcher, and then like Bill Clinton era, which was kind of that we saw in the Western world, the United States, England, with the fall of the more like in the United States, like the New Deal consensus, for example, which had that little bit of a shot of leftism to stave off something, that's kind of the theory I see on the left a lot. That the initial the welfare state was kind of a consequence of the left and labor being a little bit more organized in that post World War II era, and as kind of partially the social, and again I would say like a lot to me like the social stuff is downstream of economic. But again, you don't want to get too caught up in terms. So I guess I don't have a whole lot more to say about this since I'm not necessarily like, oh, we need to return to Christianity type person. So I guess that would again be kind of my statement on that.
Yeah. I don't want
Oh,
to
I
miss.
actually do remember. Sorry, go ahead. I do want to. One thing I did actually want to ask you, since that reminded me, maybe that's another good direction to go. Because I remember, I think it was your piece that I read kind of in preparation for this, like why I'm on the left. And if you want to expand on this a little bit more, I don't remember your exact phrasing, but you were kind of maybe dismissal of the concept of multipolarity, and I guess that's kind of where a lot of this comes down to me. And I think I would agree with it. The United States definitely serves the function that the British Empire did before that, or like the Dutch did before that. If there's a book I read about this called The Long 20th Century that you see kind of the cycles of capital accumulation. And it went from the Dutch to the British to the United States now. So there does need to be some sort of order in the world. But I think whether or not we want to do it, we being the United States, the order has to be there. I don't think that we're really capable of it militarily or even culturally. There's not a lot of support on either side of the aisle at this point. That there's a pretty strong populist impetus on both the right and the left. And with ascendant China and Russia, and I don't know if this is the type of thing that you follow, but the United States military is not what it once was. So I think there needs to be a newer consensus than like the unipolar moment of the United States post fall of the Soviet Union. So I guess that's my question to you. What are your thoughts? Do you think we're not entering a moment of multipolarity?
So, if you want to say like who's the arch neoliberal, it's probably Francis Fukuyama.
Mhm.
When he wrote that book, The End of History, he was writing during a very brief period, which was post fall of the Soviet Union, kind of pre war on terror, and obviously pre rise of China, pre resurgence of Russia. And so, yeah, at that point, it was like, okay, we have this unipolar world, we have this global hegemon, we have this superpower, and this looks good, this works. And yeah, at the time, like if you're in the early 2000s, China, I mean, the Chinese GDP per capita is $12,000. So you're still not a rich country. But, 20 years ago, no one was looking toward. I mean, there was a small group of investors, but in terms of the popular consciousness, sure, a lot of things were manufactured in China in what were sweatshop conditions, slave labor conditions. But no one was thinking like, oh, China's going to take over the world. In fact, in the 90s, when Fukuyama was becoming prominent, it was Japan that people were saying was going to take over the world. And Japan, we can argue over terms: is Japan capitalist? Is it state capitalism? Is it crony? Is it nepotism? Obviously Japan has a different form of economic system than the United States or something like that. But I think it's more fair to put it in the capitalist club than the socialist club. And yeah, people were saying, oh, Japan's just going to take over the world. That turned out not to be true. That's kind of my projection with Russia and China. People like to look at very short periods of history. I mean, this is why crypto scams work, because Dogecoin is going to the moon. Okay, yeah, if you look at a limited time frame, sure, but eventually there's no underlying value there. Dogecoin is not an improvement on Bitcoin. It doesn't, it's a meme, and I think China and Russia have more underlying value than Dogecoin, but if we compare the underlying value of Russia, China, and America, and we could consider other powers, Africa, Europe, South America, whatever. I think America has the most value out of all these countries, or out of these civilizational blocks, you could say. And I think that's for reasons of human capital. I think it's for reasons of resources. I think we have more undeveloped land, more agricultural land. We have the best agricultural land. We have the best agricultural land. We have the most oil. We have everything. We're amazing. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just like very lucky and very grateful to be born in America, and I think we're in a great position. I agree with Peter Zion. I think America is gifted and blessed with a lot of great things that other countries don't have. Very important things. There are some things that we struggle with, like rare earth minerals. That's a tough one. China maybe has an advantage over us on the rare earth minerals. But when you take the whole thing together and you look at the biggest important stuff, like energy is more important than anything. Can't do anything without energy. Furthermore, not all energy is equal. I'm actually pretty bearish on nuclear power because you can't fight a war with nuclear power. Yet maybe in the future we'll have mini nuclear reactors that can power everything. But right now, if you want to fight a war, you still need a lot of oil. You still need to power your tanks, and tanks don't run on lithium-ion batteries; they run on oil. So, jet airplanes, same thing. I think energy is the most important thing, and you can't really efficiently extract energy or develop new technologies like AI or biotech if you don't have really smart, educated people. The moment that American students start saying like, Mom, Dad, I just got into Beijing University. Oh, we're so happy. You're going to study at Beijing University, the best university in the world. When that happens, I'll start to take the rise of China more seriously and admit that I was wrong about a few things. But, students from all around the world come to America. Conservatives had this idea that American universities are useless and stupid, and people with PhDs are just woke, and they just, they walk into the class and they say, trans women are women, and then everyone claps, and then they say, okay, class dismissed,
Right.
go do some drugs or something. That's not actually truthful. That's a really severe piece of propaganda and distortion. So we have the best education in the world. We have resources. We've got a lot of good things. So if you believe that global trade is important and it's good, and you want to keep it around, then America is the best candidate for the job. No one else can do it. And yeah, I think I think global trade is good. I think it's good for technological advancement. I think it's, for me, to the extent that I have a positive story of humanity, it's that we're a technological species. This is our destiny. I'm more enthusiastic about colonizing Antarctica and the ocean than I am about Mars. But I still think that this vision is what excites me. So yeah, that's what I'm in favor of. in general. I will say that we're nearing the end of our hour, so I want to give you time to respond and also last words and closing remarks as well.
Sure. I mean, I guess I would say, I mean, I don't really at its heart disagree with really anything you were saying. So maybe it's not great radio. I guess the only thing I would really push back on, vis-a-vis the multipolarity thing, I would like to see something that's a little bit more equitable for all involved. You said like Fukuyama or Peter Zion. I read a couple years back. I read Peter Zion's "The End of the World Is Just the Beginning." A couple other books by him. Fukuyama as well. But I guess I would like to see something a little bit more equitable for all parties involved. Because I guess my thing I would say is I would like to see, because at this point it feels like American empire is not particularly beneficial to the metropole or um, globally. Well, it is, but I think it could be a little bit more equitable for everybody. And the more people we have, more seats at the table, so to speak. If we have China or Russia more as equal partners, or if they're regional hegemons, I guess that's the one thing that I would like to see. American politicians, as you mentioned, Peter Zion, making sure that we still have global trade, because if that collapses, where our goose is cooked in a number of ways. That having been said, I think we bear kind of an unnecessarily large brunt of the burden, where like the average citizen doesn't really benefit from it. If anything, I think a lot of the times in the United States, it's to our detriment of the average citizen. And yeah, I think I would agree with you there as far as like tech optimism. I work in the tech world. There's definitely a lot of problems socially that have been created because of it, but I would say like the only way out is through, so to speak. So yeah, I guess I would generally agree with you there, but I think there's still a lot to be worked out in the specifics.
Cool. Okay, well, I keep trying to create the good radio. Keep trying to
I
have an
know.
argument here, but you're not letting me argue with you.
No, well, okay, we'll go for it. What's your preferred outcome, 2024 election?
Kamala.
Okay. I'm ambivalent. I think, to me, like the part of me thinks that we would see more stability under Kamala. My like dream scenario is that Donald Trump wins. He is kind of hamstrung by a Democratic Congress and Senate that kind of sucks the air out of um, the MAGA side, and that's something I've always kind of thought, that the best defense of Donald Trump is also the best criticism of him. That he's out. If you take the rhetoric aside, he's only ever been like a pretty average Republican president. So if you kind of take the air out of those sails, and then I'd like to see the Democrats do a little bit more soul searching, and kind of reconstitute and be a little bit more focused towards the traditional worker based party that they were, as opposed to, because the things that do worry me right now with a Kamala victory is, I don't know if you saw recently, like Dick Cheney endorsed Kamala Harris. You see a lot of like the neoconservative and like the foreign policy sense who are getting behind her. And to the point earlier, like, it would be better for everybody if we can find something equitable with China, Russia, etc. So that'd be kind of what I like to see. But I don't want there to be an additional war, and I see all the neocons gathering with her. But I mean, at this point, I really think it's kind of a flip of a coin, since I've heard it called the vibes election, since there's so um, little substance really. But I guess that's my long answer, an attempt to stir up controversy for good radio.
Yeah, that we could go on endlessly about that, but I am actually glad that we had a more substantive conversation, and I really appreciate you like being very level-headed, charitable, open-minded, and willing to listen to different perspectives and come on here without any structure. It's kind of
No,
it's kind of a
that's what's
chaotic
fun
thing
about
I'm
it, right?
doing.
Mm-hmm. No, it's been fun. Thanks for inviting me on. But I mean, I guess that's kind of, if anything, if I have any closing remarks, I guess um, the I originally joined Substack again, like the Prester John's Revenge thing. It's like, well, came from the left, but I originally joined because I was so frustrated with where the mainstream left was, that I was going to be writing about criticizing it more. So much in the same way, like, Prester John wasn't a Christian, but he was fighting the enemies of Christians. That's kind of where I came from. But if I were to say anything with the heterodox perspective, it's a little bit like the political, I'm not like the other girls, but really I just joined with the idea of, like, let me hear some different perspectives, because if I was to loop it back to anything, I think at the beginning of the conversation, I think we're at a really weird spot politically and culturally. I think we're a little bit too hung up on the political framing of the 20th century. Um, and we're going to need to find new coalitions, new ways of discussing these things. And for me, reaching across the aisle and talking to people who have a different perspective than you, and trying to be a little bit less tribalistic. So I guess that would be if any had any closing statement, it would be that.
Awesome. Is there anyone you'd like to shout out or preview any articles you're working on for the future?
Yeah, I think we both mentioned we're both big fans of Catherine D. I'm actually working on a guest piece for her right now, which is a little bit more conceptual. It's tentatively titled "I Have No Mouth and I Must Stream," and it goes into like kind of weird internet subcultures around I guess you'd sometimes call it lolcows, but people who have to stream or create content in ways that are pretty undignified. And it kind of loops into data dignity, UBI, and some other stuff like that. So I'm working on it. Hopefully it comes together.
That is fascinating. I'm absolutely going to read that when it comes out. So we're looking forward to that. So everybody, encourage Prester John, give him some moral support, because I really want to read that article. But great discussion. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and hopefully we can speak again soon.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thanks a lot, man. You have a good one, and we'll talk later.
All right, take care. Bye now. All right, sorry about the audio quality, guys. We spent a little bit of time trying to figure that out. He does have a professional microphone, but there might be some settings. And I just said, rather than rescheduling, let's just go for it. This is not $1 million operation. This is actually a $10 a day operation. So if you guys would like to support, I'll mail Prester John a working microphone, or I'll send him an IT person to fix his settings. If you guys can get me to our goal of being self-sustaining. This is my full-time job. It's my sole source of income. I've dedicated, this is a what do you call it? This is a self-funded campaign. Like Trump was self-funded in 2016. This is a self-funded campaign. But if you guys want to make it sustainable for the long run, then consider monetarily supporting. If you can't do that, I understand. And liking, commenting, restacking, sharing on Twitter, social media, that all helps. That's all very helpful for getting us toward our goals. If you want to see more content, more interviews, more articles, it's just an unstoppable flow. I know I'm overwhelming people, but I can't be stopped. I mean, this is how I am. This is who I am. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.